Here's our first event. Thank you for joining, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. My name is Pillay, and I am the acting head of communications at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and I would like to welcome you here today, this morning. I will also be serving as your program director for today's conversation. This mic is trying to mute me. So it is a pleasure to welcome all of you to this important International Women's Day discussion titled When Women Switch Off, News, Accountability and Local Power Ahead of the 2026 elections. We are also especially grateful to Explain News for bringing us all together to reflect on the relationship between the news, accountability, and democratic participation. Before joining the foundation, I spent more than a decade working in newsrooms across South Africa, covering stories that often sat at the intersections of politics, justice, and the lived realities of ordinary South Africans. Many of those stories were difficult. They included reporting on gender-based violence, inequality, and the failures of systems that are meant to protect people. People, especially women, would often ask me, how do you work in the news every day? Because they explained that they would switch off because the news was emotionally exhausting and overwhelming for them. One of the last stories I reported on was the killing of Pule, a young woman who was 8 months pregnant when her life was taken from her. Stories like this stay with you. They also shape how many women experience the news, not as distant information, but as something painfully close to their own realities. At the Nelson Mandela Foundation, we work on the grounded, simple but urgent belief that democracy does not sustain itself, that it requires active citizens, access to information, and spaces where power can be questioned. The question before us today is a deeply democratic one. What happens when women begin to switch off the news? What happens when the people most affected by decisions about water, housing, electricity, clinics, and transport are increasingly disengaged from the information that allows them to hold leaders accountable? As South Africa approaches the 2026 local government elections, this matters profoundly. Local democracy depends on informed communities, and women are often at the center of these communities as caregivers, organizers, and leaders. Today's conversation invites us to reflect not only on women's relationship with the news, but also on journalism's responsibility to rebuild trust, relevance, and the accountability in our democratic life. So thank you all for being here to have this conversation with us. Our program is not long. We'll try to keep it as short as possible. And to begin our program, it is my pleasure to welcome the High Commissioner of Canada to South Africa, His Excellency James Christophe, whose support has helped us make today's conversation possible. Canada has long been a partner in advancing democratic dialogue, gender equality, and media freedom, values that resonate strongly with the purpose of today's discussion. So please join me in welcoming the High Commissioner.
Thank you very much, and indeed thank you to the Nelson Mandela Foundation for hosting us here this morning. Good to see some familiar faces and others I look forward to meeting later. So just let me say what a pleasure it is for me to be here. You know, obviously only a couple of days removed from International Women's Day, and I noted the theme obviously was Give to Gain. And, you know, it's a simple but very profound theme. You know, when we support one another through mentoring, sponsorship, or advocacy, or by simply making space for voices that are too often overlooked, we create a multiplier effect. And I think it's the spirit of this theme that is so perfectly aligned with what we will discuss here today on the topic of news, accountability, and local power ahead of the 2026 elections. The knowledge and perspective shared here today through expert speakers and through your questions and comments from the audience will indeed create the multiplier effect we so desire and make us all a lot smarter on the issue of great importance, and that is this nexus between women, the news media, and the democratic process. I was speaking with Verashni earlier this morning just about, to state the obvious, are we not all bombarded in ways that, as was mentioned earlier, make it easy to either tune out because it's far too dreadful to look at, or to be led down the garden path. And I think both these elements will come up today. So Canada is very pleased to be part of this discussion. As many of you will know, Canada has long supported gender equality globally. Within its international assistance, Canada prioritizes gender equality in several key areas, including by supporting and strengthening women's rights organizations and movements, which are critical drivers of community-level change, and by empowering all women and girls, recognizing that the achievement of gender equality is the most effective way to build a more peaceful, inclusive, and prosperous world. So as South Africa approaches its local election cycle, conversations about democracy often focus on institutions, policies, and political actors. Yet, democracy is also shaped by something far more personal and immediate, the relationship between citizens and the information they rely on to understand the world around them and to make informed decisions at the ballot box. Across communities, women play a key role in families, economies, and life in general, and their voices, concerns, and choices are deeply connected to the health of our democracies. So when women feel that the news does not reflect their realities, priorities, or experiences, the consequences extend beyond the media landscape. They're actually far more profound. They affect participation, accountability, and ultimately the strength of the democratic institutions themselves. If women's views and concerns and aspirations are not held in those institutions, reflected in them, we all pay a price for that. So this gap must be acknowledged, exposed, and discussed, and that's in essence what we're here to do today. Today's conversation offers an opportunity to reflect on how journalism can respond to that challenge. And by the end of the session today, it would be great if we all walk away with an understanding of how news can better reflect the lives of women and ensure the information empowers rather than alienates citizens as we get closer to these elections. So we're fortunate to have with us a diverse group of leading women in the media who are engaged in this work. Your insights and experiences will be invaluable in helping us explore how media can continue to better serve all citizens. So thanks everybody for being here today for what promises to be a very thoughtful and timely discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, High Commissioner. When you were talking, it reminded me of a quote I really like, and it says, "There's really no such a thing as the voiceless. They are only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard." And I think today we need to think about, do we hear women? Do we listen to women? Our next speaker needs little to no introduction in South African media. Verashni Pillay is the founder and editor-in-chief of Explain News, a platform that is dedicated to making news accessible and empowering for people who may feel excluded from traditional current affairs coverage. She will now also introduce a video that will help frame today's conversation. So please join me in welcoming Verashni.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to everyone for being here. I started Explain about 6 years ago with one animating idea. I could not understand why so many of my friends, often very high-powered women in high-achieving careers, accountants, lawyers, actuaries, would sometimes confess to me in a little bit of an embarrassed voice, I don't actually follow the news. I just don't understand it, or it's too depressing. And as someone who has always loved the news, I was that child who had a copy of South Africa's new constitution by my bedside at age 10 to 12 years old, whenever it came out, who watched Parliament live. I was very struck by that. I was very struck by the fact that we were losing these incredible voices. I was very struck at how silent women were at your typical water cooler conversations in the office, at how they exempted themselves from the public square. Because you know why? A woman can be quite thoughtful and also can take on a huge amount when it comes to domestic labor inside the house, when it comes to their community and the emotional labor of being pillars of their community. And so research after research has shown that they opt out. They opt out of spaces where they don't have the confidence to engage. And we often find that the loudest voices are those that perhaps aren't as introspective, aren't as thoughtful. A quick cursory glance at the comment section beneath any hard news article in South Africa will tell you that. Those who are often have the most to say are often the most quiet. And that's what I wanted to change. And I am part of a growing movement of media entrepreneurs across South Africa and the world who have recognized this issue. It has come up again and again in research after research and study after study. And you know what? As I was saying to His Excellency earlier today, it's not just women. I was surprised when I launched Explain how many of my male friends came up to me and said, "Thank you. Our weekly newsletter unpacks the news in a way we hope a friend would." Because so many people came up to me and asked me to be that friend in the years before I launched Explain. Now, it hasn't been an easy journey, rather. I left a wonderful job at Power FM just down the road. Some of my Power colleagues, I believe, are in the room. And I decided to start Explain. Do you know what happened 2 to 3 months later after I left my job? A little thing called COVID-19. So surviving that has been incredibly difficult. A few months after I left my job, I was also informed that the child I was waiting to adopt was coming much earlier than expected. So I ended up starting 2 babies at the same time. Explain is one, and my daughter is the other one. It has been a hard journey, but it is one that is true of many women who are trying to make a change in this country. And we are hoping that these discussions will help them to continue to make their voices heard. With that said, we want to play a little video. Kajal from my team is going to play it. And as she does, I want to say thank you to my team, to Tseho, to Kajal, to Kamachelo, to the rest of the Explain team and our contractors and our partners for making today happen. It is our first event. Thank you for joining, everyone. And and it's been very exciting getting here. And over to Kajal.
Thank you so much, Verashni, and we don't want democracy to lose half of its voice. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Phathiswa Magopeni. Phathiswa has more than 2 decades of experience in strategic, operational, and editorial leadership in the media sector. She's the Executive Director of the Press Council of South Africa, where she leads efforts to promote ethical journalism, media accountability, and the protection of media freedom. She also serves on the SABC board and is the vice chair of the African Women in Media board, contributing to important conversations about media leadership and the future of journalism on the continent. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Phathiswa Magopeni to deliver the keynote.
This is what happens when you get old. You need reinforcement. The High Commissioner of Canada, His Excellency James Christoph, the Nelson Mandela Foundation leadership, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, and fellow South Africans, good morning. I just wanted to say that, fellow South Africans. This is the only opportunity that I get to say it. I think, firstly, let me express gratitude to Verashni for organizing this conversation. It is timely, but it's also overdue. I'm not sure why we waited for this long to actually talk about this. We talk about it in the sidelines, but we have not mainstreamed it to a point where it becomes a standard agenda or item on our agenda. I mean, the strength of any democracy rests on 3 pillars: credible information, informed participation, and informed accountability. And just try and take away the information pillar and watch participation and accountability collapse. Citizens cannot hold leaders accountable if they do not know how local government budgets are spent, who benefits from public contracts, why services fail, and who's responsible when they fail. And this is why journalism matters as an institution of democratic accountability. Days like International Women's Day and South Africa's own Women's Day invite us to celebrate progress and promote women's advancement. We celebrate women who shape our lives and the future of our country, women who lead in public office and in boardrooms, and women's progress in general. But today, under the theme, when women switch off news, accountability, and local power, I want to examine what I consider a great threat. It is a risk to democracy. It is the silent threat posed by the underrepresentation of women and the declining participation in the news and information sphere. When women make up more than half of the country's population, but hold less than a quarter of the voices in political and public affairs, that means democracy is only hearing less than half of the country's voice. The crisis of representation and participation of women in the media is real. It is not just a gender issue, but a democracy problem. Several studies, including those by Gender Links, Media Monitoring Africa, now Moxie Africa, and the Reuters Digital News Report, continue to demonstrate the extent of the problem. They reveal a troubling trend of women disengaging from the news. They show that women are less likely than men to regularly engage with news and more likely to avoid it altogether. Research shows that about 4 out of 10 people say they sometimes or often avoid the news, and women are overrepresented among those that withdraw. This matters because when women disengage from news, it often leads to disengagement from the public life, policy debates, democratic scrutiny, and accountability, thereby making democracy structurally unbalanced. Globally, women appear in only about a quarter of news stories as sources or subjects. In other words, in the global public conversation, women are vastly underrepresented. Newsroom leadership also mirrors this imbalance, with women making just about a quarter of top editors. As a result, the news agenda often reflects the priorities of those who have historically held power. It is predictable that news tends to focus heavily on political conflict, elite power struggles, financial markets, and geopolitical competition. This is not to say these issues aren't important. However, topics that influence women's everyday lives, such as access to water, that's except when the Gauteng Premier confesses his love for hotel showers, public transport and safety, healthcare, housing, community safety and childcare receive less sustained coverage and are treated as crisis coverage. Yet, these are precisely the issues that matter most in local government. For millions of South African women, these are not abstract debates in terms of policy. They form the daily reality of survival. Women are often the first to experience the effect of municipal failures. Yet, the gender representation and participation gap remains in reporting on these issues. However, to understand why this is the case, we also need to be honest about media leadership and ownership power structures and how they shape the stories and content we see in the news media and the implications for democracy. There are 4 uncomfortable realities I want to highlight with regard to this. The first reality is that newsroom power reproduces itself. You can go to any newsroom. You'll find that that power reproduces itself. We know that leadership pipelines continue to reward familiarity, that is, embracing people who resemble and reinforce the existing leadership culture. When leadership has historically been male-dominated, that self-reproduction becomes entrenched and structural. This also translates into the selection, scoping, framing, and resourcing of stories. There was hope that digital affordances and more actors getting into social storytelling were going to change old newsroom structural dynamics, but this hasn't been the case. Women are increasingly becoming marginalized, their issues deliberately misrepresented, and are even bullied into leaving the digital sphere. The second reality is that authority in journalism remains gendered. When women are underrepresented as expert sources and authoritative voices, that reinforces the cultural and institutional perception that authority sounds, looks, and feels male. We experience this a lot across news and information platforms daily. And for as long as these structures are maintained and men dominate news consumption, political commentary and editorial leadership, their influence over public meaning will continue to consolidate. The third reality is that the newsroom model was built around a narrow life pattern. Traditional newsroom structures have long normalized long hours, crisis availability, and career paths that assume minimal caregiving disruption. These are patterns that disproportionately disadvantage many women in practice. And this is one tiring issue that refuses to go away because it is deeply entrenched. The last one is that gender equality and representation is too often seen as a compliance issue rather than a moral or democratic one. Research consistently shows that women in the media are frequently viewed as risky choices for critical leadership roles, rather than as natural successors. However, when women's voices are absent from the news and information landscape, the public agenda becomes distorted, and the public receives an incomplete portrayal of society. So the question is not whether a gender gap exists in news representation, but whether we are willing to honestly acknowledge what sustains it. These realities must be recognized and addressed because of their wide-ranging implications for democracy. We know that newsrooms pride themselves on uncovering hidden power in society, but sometimes the most difficult power structures to challenge are those within our own media institutions. So why does it matter for democracy, women in media, especially before local government elections? Local government is the sphere of governance where democracy is tangible. It is about water, it is about electricity, it's about sanitation, it's about safety, it's about services. However, the information ecosystem is increasingly fractured, polarized, and fragile due to various factors, including information disorders and digitally driven gendered violence. As a result, democracy itself becomes distorted. A healthy democracy needs broader and more inclusive participation to ensure proper accountability. This is for two reasons. Firstly, women are primary stakeholders in local governance outcomes. Local government decisions disproportionately impact the daily realities women face. Municipalities control access to water, sanitation, electricity, public transport, safety, healthcare, waste management, and other vital services. In many South African households, women are the primary managers of these essential services. When water supplies are interrupted, women often have to be the ones to seek alternatives. When clinics are overcrowded, women bear the greater burden of care. When communities become unsafe, women and girls suffer the most direct consequences. Yet, these issues are often underreported or scarcely framed in a gender-conscious manner in political and public affairs journalism, which tends to focus on party disputes and elitist conflicts. For the news and information media, the implication is clear. When journalism does not consistently cover how municipal decisions affect the lived realities of women, it risks missing the core substance of local democracy itself. When it ignores women's informational needs, it ignores the very citizens most affected by local government performance. And secondly, democracy cannot function optimally when half the watchdogs are missing. The news media often describes itself as a watchdog of democracy, and we like that. It makes us feel important. That is correct in part, because in reality, accountability depends on two layers of scrutiny. Firstly, it's journalists who investigate and report, and secondly, it's citizens who read, question, amplify, and act on those reports. Women are a critical part of the second layer. They are deeply embedded in community organizations, religious networks, neighborhood associations, and local civic activism. So when women engage with journalism, they often translate information into community action and oversight. But if women disengage from the news ecosystem, something important is lost, and that is the network of everyday democratic vigilance. And when that vigilance is weakened, governance systems become more vulnerable to corruption, maladministration, and policy failures. For the news media as an institution, this creates an unavoidable responsibility, because when journalism fails to engage women as informed participants in the public sphere, it weakens the very accountability systems it claims to defend. There are two risks that arise when women disengage or disappear from the news agenda, and they pose threat to accountability and democratic integrity. Firstly, political priorities shift because politicians respond to the audiences who are paying attention. If the news agenda becomes biased towards certain groups, political messages follows that pattern. The danger may be subtle, but it is real because issues that affect women risk becoming less visible politically. Secondly, democracy loses its legitimacy because democratic integrity depends on citizens believing that public life mirrors their realities. But when women feel that the news does not speak to them, politics appear distant and disengagement grows. When this happens, their absence from the political information ecosystem can push discourse towards more aggressive narratives. Women's disengagement can accelerate fragmentation and polarization when the stabilizing segment of the citizenry is excluded from the public conversation. So it is important to pay attention to women in our coverage. Another important factor is that governments tend to react to what they observe in the public discourse. When women are underrepresented and disconnected from the news and information ecosystem, policymakers receive distorted signals about what citizens value, which can lead to blind spots in government interventions. And as a result, issues affecting women might be systematically deprioritized. While the digital divide continues to receive tremendous exposure, a new gap is emerging: the gendered information divide. If men continue to dominate news consumption and political information spaces while women increasingly disengage, gendered gaps in political knowledge and public affairs may grow wider. This impacts political confidence, women's participation in policy debates, leadership opportunities, and willingness to stand for public office. Over time, this weakens gender equality within democracies. I believe that one of the least discussed consequences of women's underrepresentation and disengagement from news is that civic influence quietly shifts those who remain, it shifts towards those who remain engaged. That means public discourse is not shaped by the entire population, but by those who participate in the information arena. It is shaped by those who follow the news, debate public issues, influence narratives, and put pressure on institutions. If women disengage from news while men stay engaged, something subtle occurs. Political influence begins to tilt even further towards male-dominated spaces. This affects agenda setting, policy debates, political mobilization, and electoral messaging. In the long run, it can create a situation in which democracy formally includes women through voting rights and representation, but is informally and rhetorically defined by those who dominate the information system. So in other words, the real contest for power increasingly happens in the information sphere, not just at the ballot. And if women withdraw from that sphere, power quietly consolidates elsewhere. But here's something to consider. If democracy depends on informed citizens, what occurs when millions of women quietly stop paying attention? The real danger is not only that democracy becomes less representative, but also that it becomes less vigilant. In conclusion, if women are to be fully involved in democracy, especially as local government elections approach, the news media must adopt a targeted approach. Firstly, the news media must intentionally center and amplify women's voices. Women should be depicted not only as victims who are spoken for or activists, but also as intelligent, knowledgeable figures, experts, analysts, and leaders. Secondly, more focus should be placed on representing women and the issues affecting them in the local government reporting. Municipal budgets and service delivery decisions are not gender neutral, and they've never been, and should be consistently treated as such and beyond technical explanation, because we tend to go with the numbers, but how are these numbers crafted? What are issues that are being considered? What are the gender aspects of the budgets that we get to report on just in terms of numbers? So these are things that we need to interrogate. Thirdly, investment in accessible journalism is essential, meaning reaching people and particularly women in their languages and communities. And we have a great population that's sitting in rural areas. And women who have no access to information, all they rely on is the radio stations that are not necessarily giving them what's required, even in those languages. So we need to be intentional about the content that we put out there. As the country prepares for local government elections, the question facing media organization is not simply how to cover politics. The deeper question that the media must grapple with is how to produce gender-conscious socio-political and public affairs reporting. How are we going to do that? If journalism genuinely upholds its constitutional role in South Africa's democracy, it must not portray women simply as subjects of stories. Women need to be key participants in the information ecosystem that holds power to account. When women are informed, engaged, and visible in public debate, democracy becomes more vigilant, more representative, and more resilient. And that is the kind of democracy the news media should promote, and the character of the news and information ecosystem that this country must intentionally invest in. Thank you.
You all have a lot to think about after that. Sorry? Oh, you want to give it to her now? Okay, my boss is instructing me. Thank you so much, Phathiswa. Thank you, Verashni. Also, I made a little bit of a mistake and didn't introduce my team. The NMF team is here, and I would like to introduce, Dimpo, can you stand up from the CEO's office? And then we have Khosi from the Dialogue and Archives team. Say hi. Thank you for being here. I don't want to say too much because we all have a lot to think about after what Phathiswa has given us. I think one of the last things she said is that we need to grapple with the question of how does the news media produce agenda-conscious social-political reporting? And with that, it's my favorite part, and I hope yours too. We're going to have a little bit of brunch and mingle and ponder on what Phathiswa has just given us. And then after that, Verashni will lead a panel discussion to grapple with the questions we have been asking this morning. We are coming back at what time, Kajal, my other boss? 11:25. We'll see you at 11:25, but we are just here, so I'll just be like, hey, let's sit. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to ask my lovely panelists to sit wherever they feel comfortable. Okay. Khosi, are you okay over there? Are you okay at the end?
I have to ask.
You sure? Okay. Okay, did everyone have a good brunch? Okay, I want to say a big thank you to the Canadians because that was delicious.
Your hands.
Thank you to the caterers, and thank you to the Canadians for your largesse and for that delicious food. Before I kick off again, I just want to there's a little bit of feedback. Just wait for that. Oh, should I keep speaking while you fix that? Okay. May I ask Mr. Isak to take his seat? But actually what I want to say is I forgot to mention our board members, Achurebia and Pofu Auntie, who is sitting here. Thank you for being part of the Explain board. Thank you to Isak Minar, who is an advisor to the Explain board, and to all of those helping us in our long journey to get to where we are today. So, today I'm joined by a fabulous panel of ladies. I was thrilled that all of them said yes to being on this panel. I'm going to kick off by introducing them from left to right. On my furthest left, we have Makhosazana Zwane-Siguqa. Now, she also goes by the name Khosi. And she is absolutely fabulously the former editor of Drum Magazine and True Love. She was also head of content at Tencent Africa. She holds 2 master's degrees from Stellenbosch University, one in journalism, one in future studies. And I'm just so excited to have you on the panel today because you are telling us, you're bringing that magazine angle, which is traditionally where women audiences have been found. So really thrilled to have you on the panel. Let's give her a little round of applause. To her right is the fabulous Ferial Haffajee. I don't know if she needs much of an introduction. Ferial has been my inspiration, my role model, and my mentor for so many years. But if you happen to not know her, I don't know if you've been living under a rock, let me explain. She's the former editor-in-chief of Mail and Guardian, the first woman editor-in-chief of City Press. But more than that, she's someone who I just think of as being incredibly curious. And she's driven by that curiosity. She's not driven by status, really. She's not really driven by achievements. She's driven by going, what's working and what's not, and why isn't it working? It's why Ferial is investigating potholes in the city of Joburg, even though this is a woman who's won the International Press Freedom Hero Award. She also co-leads engagement at Daily Maverick, where she is now currently associate editor under the fabulous Gillian Green, who is the editor-in-chief, also first female editor there of that title. So a round of applause for Ferial. And then to my left, I have Nicki Gules, who I am determined to drag into the spotlight. Nicki is the woman behind the most influential news title in South Africa, and I firmly believe that as someone who watches the news, and that is News 24. Now, you might think, well, no, surely like a broadcaster is bigger, but I often think News 24 is more influential because so many broadcasters draw on it to inform their news. So I think it's an incredibly influential title, and I wanted to have the woman behind the title here because this is a driving force. She's been there for 2 years. Before that, Nicki has been a top editor in South Africa's biggest newsrooms. She sort of bounced between Sunday Times and City Press, but no matter what she's done, she's earned a reputation as being an incredible news editor. Her role now is head of news, but nobody can really work a newsroom the way Nicki can. The art of putting together a newspaper is so damn difficult, and I have seen this woman in action, and I'm in such awe of her. I bumped into somebody who has worked for you, and she said she'd come just for you to this to this event, because you were just one of her favorite bosses. So thank you for joining me, Nicki. A round of applause for Nicki.
Thanks, Verashni.
Okay, so I want to kick off with a 1-minute reflection from each of you about your thoughts on today's a topic, and perhaps bouncing off Sispat's thoughts, your wonderful thoughts. Thank you so much for that, Sispat, earlier today. So let's start with you, Nicki, and then move our way along the panel. What are your thoughts on what we heard, on your thoughts on this topic and Women in News?
Well, there was so much for me in what Sispat had to say. I mean, I wanted to stand up and cheer when she said that, the long hours in newsrooms, it's just a mandatory requirement for the job. And thinking of how many hours I spent in newsrooms. And it was only when I worked for a woman boss, which was Ferial, where I could, schlep my children to, a newsroom. And for those women journalists who think you're going to emotionally damage them, it was some of the best years of their life. They still speak about it. So no harm. But it was...
No children were hurt in the making of this newspaper.
No children were harmed at all. But it's so key, because if you look at how the patriarchy works and how men prop each other up so well, and how women are very often left to put the paper to bed. Do you know what I mean? So it's and what Phathiswa said about the caring professions and how you can't. It's very difficult to be a journalist in these conditions. And for me, it's an absolute no-brainer why 25% of top leadership, only 25% of top leadership worldwide of news organizations are women, because these are incredible constraints. But that said, I mean, I'm absolutely thrilled that we are, well, at News 24, we're at least able to make strides with most of our top leadership being women into women audiences and so on. So I do think that there was a lot. And also for democracy, I mean, Bridget, my friend who's a community activist in Melville, who's just been at the forefront of the water crisis there, which we all know about. It's those issues and her ability. She's such an example for me of trying to get different communities together and all coalesce around the same issue. Women have a great superpower with this. I mean, and that's why it's so crucial for me to get women to be more involved in the fundamentals of democracy. And as we head towards the local government elections, we absolutely need more of that. And our women are our best sources.
Okay. Great opening thoughts. Lots to unpack there. Ferial?
So just with a fabulous room like this, and because of what we're looking at today, may I take just a moment to recognize the passing of a sister journalist. Eufrida Ho passed away the day before yesterday, and there was a sister who could tell a story.
I didn't actually know that.
Where she placed herself, the story she chose to do. I was looking through them today, and one of her last stories was of the closure of a transgendered clinic in Hillbrow after the cuts in aid by the USA. And it was just told with such empathy and humor and joy that I thought we should just reflect for a moment on her passing and wish her safe transitions and love to her family, of course. So Varash, when I became an editor many years ago now, I can't believe how long ago, it was a thing, hey? It was still headline news. First editor of the Mail and Guardian. And I remember it, I didn't at the time realize that the gendered aspect of it was going to be quite so big, because the place had always been progressive and run by women. But when I realized it, I had to think and reflect quite deeply about what it means to be a feminist editor, what it means to not wear braces and smoke a cigar. I'll tell you a story about that later, what one of my GMs said to me. And then to be a feminist investigative editor. And it meant, I mean, those were very big and purposeful roles, and I needed to think how to bring a feminist and a gendered lens to everything I was doing. But it strikes me on listening to you, Pat, this morning, that it's like the great man whose house we are in today. It's like he said, you know, it's a long walk to freedom, because these were exactly the same debates we were having back in those times, and I look forward to sharing more. Huh?
Thank you so much, Ferial, and thank you for remembering Yufida, an amazing journalist.
Amazing.
Khosi.
Yeah, sure. Thank you
It's
very
not
much.
working.
Is it not working?
Oh, there.
Mike,
Always happens to
There
me.
we are.
shall I give the
Is it
handheld?
working now? Is it working now?
No, I don't know if it's
I
on.
can't
Do we know if
hear
it's on?
myself, so I can't really tell.
Oh.
Okay, it's on.
Is it working now? Is it? Okay, great stuff. Thank you very much, Verashni, and everybody else. Good morning. I think that Phathiswa narrated this very well earlier in a manner that I do not think that can be replicated in the same fashion, really. I just want to add that information disorder, which comes in the form of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, I believe are one of the greatest threats to our democracy. And when you unpack all those words and their understanding, you will realize that they were all designed to alienate us as women. They were all designed to reinforce the patriarchy, in particular, because we are in South Africa, the African patriarchy, because I think that we all understand what patriarchy is, but very few of us who happen to be invited in these spaces have lived experience of the true brutality of African patriarchy and what it means for generations to come, and the true exclusion of it as well, especially against women. Look, it does impact men as well, because they have to live up to certain expectations that are not realistic, but it is particularly brutal towards women like myself and women like yourselves who have made it out of that system into the spaces. And just to add, obviously the exclusion of the second layer of the watchdogs, as it were, which have actually been rendered pretty useless in the advent of social media, but we have to always guard for the imbalance in policy making whenever women are excluded from any conversation. Whenever we are not in any conversation, trust me, I have seldom come across a man who would deliberately, intentionally put our agenda and our experience at the table. So the less we are mentioned, the better off the status quo is viewed. And we just stay in our corners and whisper to each other. I was telling to Isaac earlier that it is so encouraging to see people like him and people like the gentleman in front joining us in this conversation, because too often we speak amongst ourselves.
Yes.
And then we go operate in a world where men are the ones who make the final decisions.
No, we are in silos. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, I've concluded my opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Khosi. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those wise thoughts. And I have to say thanks to the men in the room too. I had a couple of men ask me if they're serious that they were invited to this. Women's Day events tend to be pink things, aren't they?
Yeah.
Where we talk about women issues, but these are really issues that are of national and international import. So I want to dive a bit into the numbers. You saw on the video we showed that news avoidance, I think, was almost double that for women than it was for men. But an interesting thing emerges in South Africa. Those were global stats. And I want to go to Nicki first. Nicki, firstly, how big is News 24's audience? And then what is the gender split?
Well, when I was doing my research on this for the last 2 days, I was quite shocked myself, really. So we have 4 million page views a day on average,
Jeez.
which translates to about 500,000 unique browsers a day.
Which are people.
Which are people,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's
500,000
500,000 people a
yeah.
day checking your website out.
Yeah, exactly. And we have, of that, we have 120,000 subscribers. So those are people who pay every month to have unlimited access to our content. But our gender split is 50-50, bang on. It's not a point something, it's exactly 50-50. But that is overall. But when you get to the subscriptions and people who have subscriptions, it is a little bit skewed for men. I think that's because men have more money. I don't know. The pay gap, we still have that. So it's slightly skewed to men, but not much. It's by a few thousand. So it's not that that significant. And it's interesting also what women consume. So we have the top stories, the news, the politics, and the investigation. So women are there reading those and consuming that content. So we have, but it's very interesting when you go lower down, and I think that this speaks to how much time women have to consume the news. We have, so out of all of our women readers, we have 20% of them who engage with the top stories, who read the top stories. And then as you go further down, deeper into the site,
20% of the people engaging with the top stories, or the women themselves?
Of the women themselves.
So the top stories above, okay, I just got off. The top stories above the fold, for those who aren't aware, are your hardest news stories. Those are...
Yeah, your top ranked stories.
Yeah.
So in our case, that'll be like the top 7, right? So the top ranked stories, 20% of the women subscribers or the audience read those. But then the deeper you go into the site, the more women drop off. And
That's
I think,
interesting.
yeah, and I think that speaks to how much time women have to actually, consume the news. I mean, I look at myself, right? If it wasn't for text to speech, I wouldn't be,
a functioning human.
A functioning human, and be able to cook at the same time. So, in terms of but the interesting thing is the preferences. So women are very much the News 24 women audience are very much into news, then crime and court.
That's interesting.
Then politics, and only then business.
Okay.
But business audiences have always been historically male dominant.
Yes.
As
I understand
I've
it
known
too.
that for years. But interesting, it's top stories, then news, then politics, then business.
That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing those stats with us. We're going to come back to you more to hear more about the other sections of News 24 that appeal to women. But I find that quite interesting. But part of me wonders if it's true for the News 24 women or for all women, because it does seem quite specific to your female audiences. And so I'd like to get a different view from Ferial. Ferial, you've been having so much fun at Daily Maverick, also just a giant of the media in South Africa, of independent media in South Africa. And you've been doing some really interesting things with newsletters and taking audiences' concerns and really using that to enormously inform your journalism. And my question to you was, looking at it from a gendered lens, what has led to engagement from women in this kind of audience engagement work you've been doing and steeping yourself in the past few years?
Thank you, Varash. So I think I've told a few friends the story is my mom only ever had one house which belonged to them, and it was her small place in Mayfair. So she passed away last year at 95 years old, and she just would not move from there. Now, no matter what, like, Ma, you must move now. We go, no, it's my house. So anyway, I spent a lot of time in Mayfair where I grew up. And then I started noticing that suddenly there were a lot of electricity cuts and stuff, but mostly I started noticing that women were walking around the area with buckets on their heads again. And children were lugging 5-liter bottles. And this told me, like, what's happening with the water? And I started counting water cuts because I had seen this in my own neighborhood. And then, of course, just covering it for years and years and years, you kind of could anticipate that we were heading for a massive water crisis in Joburg. But it very much started in my mother's small room watching other women experience this, the taps being turned off. And it was a story very close to my heart because as a young journalist, some of the first stories I did in the years of freedom was the extension of taps into the yards and the homes of people who had never ever had water, and those were often women's stories. Yeah. So that is about putting a gendered lens on a story, of just being conscious of what you're seeing. And then what I've learned from there on, Varash, is that when you're touching the everyday lives of people like that, they read. Because I thought nobody at all is going to be interested in my story on traffic light outages and electricity cuts and water outages, and then they were. And I realized that's because it was touching their lives. So that was the lesson I drew, and that's why now I only do local stories, mostly.
Incredible. And I think that speaks to the lived reality of the women on the ground. So, Khosi, I want to come to you, where magazines have traditionally been a more female space. Why is that? As much as things are starting to shift, and I love to hear that from Nicki, but why have magazines been seen as a space that is more for women?
Yeah.
What are they getting right?
Quite a question, and I'm going to need you to bear with me as I narrate to you my story.
Sure.
As to how I moved from hard news. I had a few front pages which actually won awards, but through my story, through the intersectionality of my story, I'm hoping to tell a story that you can make of it what you will. But look, it is actually a very interesting phenomenon, because since the beginning of media itself, mass media has always been segmented into women's interest and real news. And until to date, our DNA traces our thinking as women in the newsroom to the women's desk. I don't know if you still remember the women's desk. We have not been able to shed the women's desk mentality off. In order for us to be taken seriously as equals to a certain extent with the men in the newsroom, we had to carve our own spaces. And the women's desk has always been our spot. Sis Dolly, you know them, you know? That has been our trajectory. You always were moved towards the woman's desk, and that was you having reached it. You've really, really done well. Then obviously, True Love, which started as a men's magazine,
True Love was a men's magazine?
True Love started as a skin magazine for men.
I had no idea. Who knew this?
Wow. True Love used to be an alternative, a more risky alternative to Drum magazine. The drum boys in the drum room, you know them with their cigars. If their cigars and their alcohol.
The guys go to Catsy's.
Yeah. And the women danced and the men viewed.
Yeah.
That mentality, that social paradigm, that social framework literally lived in the newsroom for the longest time. And when I was appointed editor at Community Media, where I started my journalism, I was the other woman who was there used to be a gospel reporter. And then there was me and my nosy self inserting myself in Mfuleni local municipality issues, which still exist, by the way. So there I was, and the editor retired, and I was promoted to this position. Guess what happened?
What?
Mass resignations.
Mass
resignations. I even received death threats. My sister's right here, she'll be able to tell you. Like, this is literally my introduction into the editorship role. It was like, who do you think you are? Sure. You black girl from the township who's 24 years old coming here to tell us what to do. So that is the one story that I have to tell you. And from it, you'll be able to draw out some themes, right? The second story is, after what I thought, okay, I've made it into the community space, I called Esmery Vederman, who was the first female CEO of News 24.
Media 24, yeah, NASPA. Yeah.
And I said, look, I think I am ready to move. And she said, okay, great, where do you see yourself? So thinking that I'm modeling myself on her trajectory, very few black female leaders at the time, I'm like, I'm going to do what you're doing. I'm going to hard news and so on. And she's like, no, I'm now at Drum. But I think you can do something more serious. Let's get you an interview somewhere else. You always need a sponsor, ladies. You know that. You must get a sponsor, somebody who believes in you. So I get this interview. Luckily, there's an opening, and it is of an associate. Well, it used to be called a managing editor, but these days we all do a bit of everything,
Yes.
really. That is a pretty senior one in a mainstream publication. I walk in, and there's 3 men. One is the owner. Not sure what he was, the owner or the publisher, but he has since passed on. The other one is a GM, and there's the editor-in-chief. I was referred to as, you're a cool, nice-looking chick, more than 4 times in that interview.
What?
When it was time to talk salaries, the owner/publisher said, my editors, or my editor, who's a man, earns this much, and you cannot possibly want more than that. And when I pushed back, we were very radical back then, I was telling Pat, when I pushed back aggressively, he threw me with a line I'll never forget. He said, well, have you seen my dogs? And I said, what? He said, my dogs consume this amount of food a month. You're a single woman, you don't have any children, you can't possibly want to earn, and basically, you know, like, compared me to what the monthly bill that his big dogs
That's shocking.
had. That threw me off. Went back to Esmeralda and I said, I'm not doing this. And then I ended up at Drum as news editor at Drum magazine. So what I'm trying to say is that nobody really sets out to be a woman's interest journalist. We all set out to be journalists. But in order for us to survive, in order for us to grow, in order for us to get to the next mountain, you have to make some compromises. You have to make some adjustments, which you have to live with. But you must still fight the system and fight back and see how far that gets you. The results vary, I'll have to tell you. Pushback, there's wins and there's losses. But we all have a story to tell, and structurally, everything has been basically set up almost like against us. And we all have a story. I'm sure all of us have got a similar story to tell, where you're just disheartened and you had to go carve an issue yourself. Now, women, being the creatives that we are, will always find a way to exist. So
Let me come in there.
Yeah.
Yes, because I absolutely agree with you. And I think just the way I phrased the question was also problematic. I'm hearing, you know, from what your story tells us, is should there be this idea of women's journalism and the rest? You know, should there be the silo? So I want to actually throw that, and thank you for sharing your story. I mean, it's so fascinating and so shocking. But I want to throw it back to Nicki, because Nicki, you sent some interesting thoughts about how do we begin to change this? How do we begin to get out of the siloed mentality where women are feeling alienated by the news? Let's start talking about some of the solutions. How do we claim back those audiences?
Well, I'm very happy to report that our women's desk is dead. We do not have such.
Did you kill it?
No, it was dead when I got there, Fair. It was, I'm very happy because we can't be doing. But I think, especially, I mean, speaking for my audience, we have not so much a women alienation from news problem as a general everyone is alienated from the news.
Yeah,
and there's
that's
so
true.
much news fatigue. And we get it, right? I mean, it takes a special sort of, I don't know, psychology to be able to interact at all times with, you know, grisly stories. And we all know the South African news cycle. It's one thing more shocking than the other. So what we have found, interestingly, and this sounds weird, but bear with me, is we've got to give people hope. So I now have a good news editor. My good news editor is there. He's got a really interesting philosophy on good news. It can't just be like, oh look, some nice corporate is throwing money at something. No, it's got to be, it's news, but it's good news. So we are foregrounding more and more good news with really interesting results to counteract that news fatigue. And the response that we get is always so positive to those stories. Like yesterday, we ran a story on South African success stories, small SMMEs that South Africans have built and that have gone on to go do great things. And the one was Wedgwood Nougat. And the story was the most shared out of
What is the
everything
story again?
on this little company that was started in a
Oh, I saw that.
KZN
I saw the
auntie's
story.
kitchen.
The nougat, yeah. The
Yeah, and it went on to be this really fantastic medium enterprise. I wouldn't say it's big, but I mean it's, it's a really good going concern. And that story was yesterday's most shared.
Oh, wow.
Out of everything News 24 published yesterday, from the Madlanga Commission disasters to and Suleiman Karim, which is an insane story, to the investigation by Jeff that we had published in the morning, all of it.
Wow.
Wedgwood Nougat was the most shared, and I think that that's instructive to how we try and get over. And it's not sunshine journalism. It's not gratuitous good news. It's news. It's news.
Yeah.
But it's not. So I think, and it's something I'm quite passionate about, is we have to tell what's going on, not what's going wrong. Not only what's going wrong. And this doesn't mean adopting a sunshine journalism approach. It also means, I think, that we should look at solutions journalism. So, because a lot of the time you read a story and it's like so heinous, and like GBV stories do that to me, gender-based violence. You think like, how else can a woman get killed in this republic? Like really.
Yeah.
So, and you end up being so disheartened, and you feel really disempowered at the end of all that. And I think if we focus a little bit more on how we can address these issues, how can these things be, what can you as a reader do to assist and to make things better in some way, then I think that gives people a bit of the agency back,
Okay. I love that. I hear a lot of from the audience. I think you guys are also agreeing with that. Ferial, I want to ask you, as someone who's been in the news for so long, have you had the same experience I spoke about earlier, where people kind of confess to you, do the women in your life follow the news, the women who aren't in the news? Do you find that they're following the news? And then what are your thoughts to get them to care? What can we as journalists do differently?
So to tell a story about my cousin Zayn, there's dad, Uncle Karim. They came back from exile in Canada and to South Africa, and really part of building the new country. And very excited when I became the editor of the Mail and Guardian. Really excited in my family. Until one day my beloved uncle called me and he said, "God, that's a wrist slitter." And he meant like I'm publishing a newspaper that makes him want to slit his wrists. There is no break in it. There is no beauty. It's not a reflection of the country he loves and has come back from Canada to live in and build. And now we're saying it's just a fuck up. And so he didn't like this at all. And then that really taught me that exactly what Nicki says is now you have to, those are areas at the Maverick that we call stories that delight me and give me a break. And they are inevitably the most popular and the most shared and the most liked stories. And I think that speaks to the attention deficit economy of the world, not only the country, where people have had enough of war and bad news. They do want to be distracted and they do want to be delighted. And my uncle taught me that very, very early on. Can I talk about the Book of Women and Women's
Yes, I was
Days?
going to ask you for that, but please go ahead.
Thank you. So when I was editor at the Mail and Guardian, I was really at the Financial Mail. One day I was sitting in the news conference and I was really, it's quite a very powerful publication, but it was completely untransformed. And I meekly put up my hand and I said, when are we getting some black or women columnists? And the response was absolutely horrified.
Really?
Where are we going to find them? Where? They're just not there, And so I thought, this is not going to work really for me. So then I started putting together the little black book of black expertise across the economy, the polity, civil society, everything, engineers, whatever you wanted. Don't tell me they're not there, because they are there. And so we started this book, and then the Financial Mail loved it because obviously it became a big money spinner. But my work in doing that, and then the Mail and Guardian's Book of Women and the Young South Africans You Must Take to Lunch, is really because I believe that's how you make space, that's how you democratize institutions. I'm surprised that we should still need lists like those or quote this woman, because I'd have assumed that at some point society democratizes and equalizes, but it doesn't do that without constant vigilance. So thanks for asking, Verash.
Thank you. Thank you. I was going to get to that. So Ferial, as you guys all know, she did start these innovative products at the Mail and Guardian. This was many years ago. And so, Khosi, I want to come back to you and, this lens you've had on how the media can be, the establishment can be very anti-woman in a way. And to say, maybe, us on this panel might be patting ourselves on the back a little bit. What are the innovations that should be happening now? One thing that strikes me is that we're still very middle class, right? So I know I don't prep you for this question. I'm kind of throwing it at you. What? Can you give us a little bit of diagnosis in your view of what could we do better?
I think that we should, at this point, introspect and realize that the gatekeeping function of journalism is muted, and perhaps even permanently so. The idea that I alone will decide what 100,000 people read and say and how they react is void. We need to embrace new platforms. We need to embrace new storytellers, and we need to induct them into the ethics of our journalism. And we leverage off each other's strengths. That is what I think for far too long we've held certain sectors of the content ecosystem at arm's length, even turning our back against it with our noses in the air, without realizing that people will find information. My source of information, sadly, is no longer an established news platform. I go there to verify what I've seen on TikTok from a nuclear physicist who takes her time to unpack the stories for me in 3 minutes. And I am preaching to the converted, because I do believe that this is what you're attempting here with Explain.
Exactly.
It is to package the content in the news that I can digest, as Nicki said, while I'm eating my dinner, while supervising my child do her homework. Because women do not have time to bring it back to the woman thing. My husband is always saying to me, oh my gosh, you eat so fast. And I'm like, shut up. I used to eat much slower until I had this child. Now I have to eat so fast because I must still make sure that, I don't know, you know what I mean? So we have limited time, right? Because by the time he sits down, by the time he sits down to eat, I'm done eating because I'm ready. Everybody has to be
so
doing
much
everything
going
else.
on.
So there's so much going on. We do have very little time, but nobody really thinks about us before they create the news or their package. They think about us as an aftermath. It's like, oh, will the woman? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas we are the ones who are actually impacted by everything that happens. We're the ones who have to carry those. Ferial, how many men did you see carrying those buckets of water?
Not so many.
Oh, really? Or mostly men?
Mostly women.
Oh, mostly women, okay.
It is mostly women, and you're from where I am from, which is in the Eastern Cape these days, it is always women.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to come back to this idea of the time poverty of women and how they have less time. And that is true, again, of men and women. And thank you for shouting out Explain. So something we've tried to do is to innovate around this, to say, our weekly wrap of the news is, the only source you'll need to read or consume if you don't have time to read anything else. But if you can't read it, there's a voice note. I speak it out, and I know some women who will go and have a bubble bath and just listen to it every Thursday because it's all they have capacity for. And it was to try to empower them. We're also now, I'm going to do a little plug, we're launching this influencer partnership model with the newsroom because of what Khosi has said, which is that people increasingly are going outside of these gatekept places and going directly to influencers. And that is fabulous in many ways. But Nicki, I want to come to you, as someone with 20 years, to kind of say, are there dangers to that? What would you say to people? And there's this bit of a wellness. I keep hearing this from wellness influencers that people should start avoiding the news, that the news is bad for you, that it doesn't impact your life, that it just makes you feel bad about yourself. And I always think that's a very privileged position to take, to be able to avoid the news. But it is something that is coming through in a lot of younger spaces, social spaces, wellness spaces, just avoid the news. Just go to social media for your needs. What would you say to that, Nicki?
Well, I'd say what's bad for you is really taking all your information from a news influencer on TikTok or Insta, and these people who have not been inducted into our ethics, who don't know, what they. So shout out to you for this partnership, because I think that is the biggest threat that faces journalism today, and it's a credibility crisis. It's an incredibly big problem, because journalism takes money to produce. We have to pay salaries and communications, cars, all that, and then an influencer will just come in, take all your work, paraphrase it, pass it off as theirs, and then what?
Yeah.
So it's incredibly important that issue gets tackled, and thank you for that. This whole idea about mental wellness, I mean, I get it. So I have my parents. My mother is a 78-year-old news junkie, and my father is increasingly adopting the head in the sand approach. So my mother, we had to shut up on the hour every hour, because that was when the news was on the radio. She had a problem with her blood pressure, and my sister had the temerity to suggest that it might be because she consumed too much news. Well, joke's on me, because she was right. The blood pressure did go down for those 3 weeks, that she was off News 24.
That's a problem.
I mean,
You're not helping our cause.
no, but it really gave me, pause to think. My father's like, oh, stay away from it, man. Oh, I can't deal with this. I mean, he's informed, because my mother would tell him things. But it's a consideration that we have to have. It's like, what impact are we having? But we can't also, we can't patronize our audiences. We can't say, this is what we think you need to know. I mean, we're doing that anyway with what we assign, who we assign to stories and what stories we cover, and those decisions that we make on a daily basis. So it is definitely something that we need to look at. And that's where I come back to good news and your solutions journalism, because I think it's those feelings of unresolved, it's unresolved despair, really. And you can't channel that. What do you do? What do you do when you feel disempowered by a story or despairing at a story? That's got to be channeled into something people can actually do.
So that's the
I think
solutions-based.
Yeah, solutions journalism will help.
And giving them a way forward. And I love that, and I want to come to the rest of the panel as we start to close up and before we go to the questions from the audience. So, Ferial, and of course, whoever wants to take this one, are we thinking about this too narrowly? Are we kind of saying, oh, women aren't reading the news, but are they engaging in other ways? Are there other ways we should be reaching people, or women, or those who are fatigued by the news, or are practicing news avoidance? And if those who didn't see the video earlier, news avoidance has jumped. As much as there's spots of good news, like I love the stats you've told us, news avoidance has jumped. Should we be thinking about this in other ways? The same way, Ferial, you sat down and thought about how do we challenge this notion that there aren't black columnists? Should we be challenging this notion that there's news avoidance?
So there's a fabulous guy in the US called Brian Stevenson. I hope his name's right. He campaigns for people who are in prison when they shouldn't be, because they couldn't have lawyers, they couldn't afford it. And so when I listened to him speaking, Verashni, people said to him, so how do you do this? And he said one thing, you've got to get proximate. And that really stayed with me very deeply. Is I could cover the Zondo Commission. The next beat I wanted to have was the African Continental Free Trade Area, because I'm so interested in it. I wanted to become a Pan-Africanist journalist. But then this pull of being proximate or being local has really shown me what I think is the way forward for journalism is to be of service. You have to be next door to. And that's why I want to learn the tricks of news influencers, but I honestly do not believe that news influencers are the way out of the news avoidance trap at all, because I find like it's so egotistical. It's all about the I rather than journalism, which is about the we. So I've decided it's not something for me, and I'm going to find ways of using WhatsApp more cleverly, because that's where communities organize themselves, like Bridget knows so well. That's how communities organize nowadays. So how do you be on WhatsApp, but as a journalist in service of city and to be much, much closer to the ground?
Okay, love that. Khosi, last thoughts from you, and also any idea of what we can be doing better in this industry?
I think that, and I was saying this to Ferial and yourself, that we perhaps need to drop the paternalistic approach, right, that we inherited from our male bosses and owners, that attitude that in order for me to make an impact in the world, I need to act in a certain way and view a world in a particular lens and hide myself from it, because I've been conditioned to believe that my views and my opinions don't matter. So it's all about deliberately making that conscious choice that when I enter into this space, I need to represent the 51 plus women who are here in South Africa and what really interests them. So I think that we need to get rid of that woman's desk mindset. I think that we should look, there are a few tools, WhatsApp, for example. One of my favorite publications I receive on WhatsApp, and I read it till the end, and it is on PDF. So we tend to think that we need these great innovations. We need the next Facebook, we need the next Instagram, we need the next platform. And sometimes, in order to protect us while still serving, good old PDF, guys. I can't even tell you how how accessible the continent, how accessible the continent is because of its of its WhatsApp strategy. And I suppose I have to come back to you and your voice notes. So there's sparks of creative ways of getting around everything else. And lastly, AI is what it is, and this is a different event. But using AI to hyper-target the people that we really want to talk to can really help us. Instead of going through rows and rows and rows of raw data, use AI to enable you to target your audience effectively, efficiently, and target what it is that really concerns them. What is the sentiment? Fill the room without first rushing to see what was yesterday's most read story, because there's a lot of nuances in looking at that data alone. Why that story was a leading story yesterday, today it is not. So you ought to be in touch with your community.
That was amazing. Thank you, ladies. Please stay seated. Those are all my questions, but we have such a rich resource in the room. While I ask you guys to think about your questions, can I ask Kajal to come up and put up our link for our survey? So while we take questions, I want you guys to also just fill in our survey and tell us how you found this event. At the same time, can I ask Tejo to come get the mic here? You can put the survey on behind me. And you can take it to people. If the sound guys can put that mic on, and we can go around the room. And you can just switch that mic on, please, Tejo. So we'd love to take some questions. We have amazing people in the room, as I said. I see Beauregard, my old colleague, is at the back. Hello, Beauregard. So that is the QR code. You can scan that with your phone and just fill in our survey while we take these last questions. I'd be super grateful. And then at the same time, can I ask who would like to ask? We'll take 3 questions, and then we'll go from there. Okay, I'll take the lady in the pale pink jacket over there first, and then Ella at the back. And who else had their hand up?
Tando.
Oh, and Tando? Did Tando have a hand up? Where? Yeah. Oh, that was Tando. Okay. Hello, Tando.
Hello, my name is Tando Mayego, and yes, I'm a woman in media. This is a fascinating discussion. But one thing I want to highlight is just the changing nature of media with the news influences and how people engage in media. Do you think this shift is creating more opportunities for women in media, or just new versions of the same barriers as described by the panelists?
Great. Tando, I'm sorry for not recognizing you, but thank you. That was a great question. Ella.
I have a question for, well, I guess all of you, we're all editors. How does media ownership and the nature of media funding affect the way you go about trying to report on women? How much time you're able to allocate to sourcing those stories? If there's no data, maybe putting a reporter on a beat where a woman's issue is somehow part of that. How does the demographics of who owns the publication affect that? And then, of course, not all publications are for profit, like, say, donor funds or something like that. So the nature and demographics of ownership, how does that affect the reporting?
Another great question. Thank you so much. Gail was next, the lady over here in pink. Thanks, Tejo.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Gail Smith. Thank you for a great panel, really great inputs. I guess I have a real concern because I think the issue of women's exclusion and the whole notion of having women, feminist journalists and editors who are covering these stories, I think the fact that the Daily Maverick is putting a very senior journalist onto this, or the senior journalist is choosing this. But I think what we often forget is that there's also a level of skill and involvement, that skill involved in gender reporting. And while gender as a profession really grew exponentially for 20 years, it has now slumped and plummeted so badly. There's no more money going into gender desks. There are no more gender desks, and now we need them more than ever. So I guess my question to the panel and to the women in these positions is, do you think you have sufficient resources to try to do the kind of gendered reporting that is required? Because it is a specific skill, it is a specific analysis that is required. And not to, just to say South Africa has that skill, a lot of women who are qualified to do that kind of work. But I think there's often this assumption that gender just comes because one is a woman. And so my point really is, to what extent are you going to be putting resources, or do you put resources into having not just women there, but women or men who are qualified and interested in doing the kind of deep analytical work that is often required to bring a gender analysis to a news story? And recognizing, I'll just share an anecdote. About 2 years ago, I did a session on gender responsive budgeting with National Treasury and the Department of Women. And the staffers from both of those organizations admitted that they had no gender analysis skills. They were being trained by the Canadians, they said.
Canadians again.
30 years later, they didn't have the skill. So I guess now that we need it more than ever, is there going to be, I mean, Nicki, you spoke very eloquently about not wanting women's desks, but I would argue now more than ever we need gender desks, which is what the New York Times has done. They actually have a gender editor and an entire team doing that kind of work. So it's just to the question of resources and to how important you think that's going to be, and if you're going to put those sorts of resources into doing the kind of gendered reporting that is required to re-engage women.
Thank you, Gail. Okay, guys, some tough questions there. I'm gonna throw it open to the whole panel. So Tando asked about, are influencers being given more opportunities for women? I mean, is in the influencer world providing more opportunities for women, or is it more of the same in terms of entrenching patriarchy? Ella asked about media ownership and its effect on women and resources. And you've heard Gail's question. Who would like to go first?
Okay, I'll go.
Okay.
I may just forget. To Tando's question, Tando, I think that the digital divide is real. Internet costs are a real threat to our social democracy. It is real in the sense that you have the urban youth. I happen to live in 3 very different worlds. And I move from this world and I go right in the Transkei, the former Transkei, in Engqeleni. And there people literally have to scramble to find 15 rands just so that they can get data, so that they can, we call it data here, which is mobile, the internet, so that they could very quickly send a voice note to their husband who's in Rustenburg working in the mines. Then I moved to Sandton, and I'm faced with unlimited Wi-Fi everywhere I go. In these spaces, I'm never shut off. You see what that does now? And then I move into the wine lens, for example, and you find these farm laborers who are in exactly the same situation as in England in the Eastern Cape. So we are, my real fear is the digital divide, resulting in massive inequality, in massive knowledge inequality throughout. The issue about ownership, I'm still very much a purist. I keep a very clear line between editorial and I know, but we have to, ownership, I do not think should be a factor when we're making editorial decisions. I don't think that it is not a factor currently. I'm saying it should not be a factor. So I can only answer it to that extent. It shouldn't be a factor. Public interest journalism, if that is what we're practicing, should be that. And there's various tests for us to see if the story is really in the public interest or not. The last question has to do with...
Well, you don't have to answer all of them.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
But thank you, though. Those are some good
Thank
answers.
you. No, thank
You
you
were like
very
trying
much.
to get through it all. Do you guys have any thoughts on the questions that were put forward? I mean, the last one was Gail's, but the media ownership one as well.
Sure. So when I leave here now, I'm going to put the finishing touches on a panel. We had a readers panel on the absence of street lights in Joburg. So I mean, as Joburg women, just by show of hands, is like it's so dark driving around or in taking public transport. It impacts your life, right? So once when I asked the question on X, do you have street lights in your area? I got thousands of responses, put them into a spreadsheet, and most of the people responding were women. Because not having street lights impacts your freedom to move, it impacts your ability to have a nightlife, it impacts your family life, it just impacts your freedom in ways untold. Now, the only reason I know how to do that is because I come through the school of Colleen Lomona and Pat Made and all the women who taught me to look and report with a gendered lens.
Nice.
That kind of training is not happening any longer. From the time I was a trainee up to an editor, I was always going to be sent on courses to be taught to look like that. So now I'll just say to Naledi and to Anissa who are doing it, hey, there's a piece of, there's a reading I found on how street lighting impacts women's lives in cities. Let's look at it as we do our roundtable. But it's certainly not happening in a structured way any longer, Gail. Huh?
Which is true of so many beats. And I hate to say this, but then the thing that gets affected first is the gender, right? So training isn't happening in so many beats, and then the gendered one is the first one to take the fall.
That is certainly the case. I mean, if I look at what my newsroom priorities are, I mean, as a woman and as a feminist journalist myself, I cannot say that a gender desk is on my priority list.
Unfortunately.
Because, it's just not something we can afford. The fact that, you know, we have had such incredible shifts in the media, the advertising industry, or advertising has tanked. You know, there's so many financial constraints on media houses. I mean, if I look, and if you look at the news cycle, I have 5 crime reporters. Nothing says South Africa like I have 5 crime reporters. And those people are busy.
Yeah.
They're incredibly busy. We are on crime, we are on court, and because that moves the needle for us, because that's what our people want to read. Well, we try and do it a little bit different, but I absolutely agree with Ferial about having the gendered lens being on everything. I mean, we relentlessly cover stories of domestic violence and femicide because we need to.
Yeah.
And yes, it's normal. It's not news anymore, but we do cover it relentlessly because it is our duty to do it. And we will do things that are not popular stories, that may not get the numbers, but because they're stories we need to do. We're unapologetic about that. Also have at my own organization, having so many women in senior management, it really helps. You don't have to fight anyone to get your, to get your agenda done. You know, we do it ourselves.
Yeah.
So, but it is, I mean, a gender desk would be marvelous, but
Which is different from a woman's desk. I just want to make
Yeah,
that
no,
distinction.
women's, yeah, no.
yeah. A gender desk would be about gendered issues, right?
Yeah.
And I think what they were talking about is like, oh, women's, like a pink desk.
Yeah, no.
But I don't want to end on that depressing note because it is, and I do wonder if we're being a little bit naive because I have to be honest, Ella, like I'm a media owner technically. There just is no money, and I hate saying that, but it's true. I mean, there's very little money compared to what there used to be. When I started off in newsrooms, there were internship training programs. Like Ferial came up through a cadet program in the Mail and Guardian. People forget about those things that existed. I went to shadow Ferial while I was studying journalism, and I was fascinated. I was like a woman editor. But the point is, those things are increasingly not there. We can't be naive and say, we don't know. We do know. It's just the money isn't there, and we're trying to figure it out. Places like me, my fellow media entrepreneurs from the continent to even well-resourced places like Becky Sisa are all trying to figure this stuff out. How do we train people up? So we've kind of run out of time on questions, but I want to just, if you can just indulge me, if I want to just make sure I don't miss anyone. Are there any more questions before we? Okay, over there. Sefo, can I ask you to go over there? If you can introduce yourself, please. Anyone else who would like to state something or say a question before we wrap up? Over there, okay. So if you can go to that lady and the one over there.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the panel and the speakers. I really appreciated it. So I'm Seneme Mtembu, and my background is in financial services, in analytics and partnerships. But what got me thinking was what was proposed about the influencer reporting that needs to be inducted into the code of ethics. And it's got me thinking about that we have a lot of experts, right? What have been the barriers, or maybe there's a solution, but how do we induct them into the code of ethics, but also to get them to start writing? The Black Book also got me thinking as well. So these people have a voice, they probably want to contribute to the information economy, but how?
And while we go into the next question, I just want to say we did invite people like Dan Corder, Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, those big influencers. And in many ways, they do see themselves as apart from us. But I think we need to start bridging those gaps. And I know people like Kate Skinner and Sanef are having those conversations.
actually, weirdly, so I chair the Diversity and Ethics Committee at SANEF. And we really, really need to have a code because the press code governs us, right? So we all ascribe to the press code, and there's a code of conduct, and you can do this, you can't do that, etc., etc. But influencers are out there wilding with the potential of like doing serious harm. We need to urgently codify, and it's something that we did speak about at our last Diversity and Ethics meeting. We've got to actually have, I don't know, a 10 commandments of news
but then also bring
or
them
something,
into the
and bring them
conversation
into
so
the
they say yes.
conversation. And also, we were thinking about holding workshops, ethics workshops at different, host meeting houses around the country. And that's certainly something that we need to look at doing. In terms of how they can monetize this, I mean, that would, and we would certainly be open to bringing them into the fold, but then obviously, how they earn a living and all of that then comes into play.
It's complicated, yeah.
And it is very complicated, but certainly on the ethics.
So we're running out of time. I just want to
We're
take a
there.
quick comment from Sispat, who had a response to that, and then go to our last question.
Just on the code of ethics question, there isn't going to be a new code for other people.
She's like,
There
it's the
isn't going
press
to be a new
code.
code. The fact is, journalism is grounded on media ethics that are contained in that code. So if a podcaster or a content creator wants to operate in the journalistic space, they are covered by the same code. And we are starting to see some of them joining the press council.
Amazing.
And
Good.
we are training them on the code because that is what guides journalism and good journalism.
And
So
information.
there isn't going to be
Yeah.
a new code for them.
Yeah.
A code, we only have one code. We only have one set of media ethics.
Thank you.
Nice.
I need to give you a round of applause for that because the press code, I don't think enough South Africans know how lucky we are to live in a society governed
really
by the
are.
press
We
code.
really are.
In a country like America, you would have to have enough money to go find a lawyer to defend your rights. And in South Africa, most news publications have signed up, and those who haven't are pariahs, I have to say.
They really
have
are.
signed up to the press code, and that means if I talk nonsense about you, you don't need any money to lay a complaint against me, and I have to take it down, and I have to apologize. That is rare. Anyway, our last question.
Hi everyone, my name is Tando Shope. I'm a video journalist with Reuters covering sub-Saharan Africa. Just to add on what you mentioned earlier about training people up, I'm wondering what efforts are being put into retaining talent, because I'm seeing the influencers that you speak about are a bunch of journalists actually moving into the digital space who do care about the code of conduct and their names and their faces. It's people that whose bylines we've seen. It's people I've worked with on the field and who care about journalism. So what efforts are being put into actually retaining that talent? Because these people are not only just moving to digital for egotistical reasons. Some are time that you spoke about. It frees up so much time off your hands, and also money. If you're getting better money digitally, why not move that way? So what are you doing to retain talent in traditional media as well? Thank you.
Thanks, Tando, and that will be our last question, and we can just answer that.
Well, retaining talent is always an issue. In a shrinking media landscape, there's a shortage of jobs, and there's some really, really good people out there. I mean, I wish I could hire. There's so many people I wish I could hire, but I just can't. So it's about, for me, it's about not just the money. It's about how do you retain people? How is it? What is it like to work in your newsroom? Do you know, how good are you at leading people? How are you at, how compassionate are you as an organization? Because another thing that confronts journalism is an incredibly difficult space to work in. I mean, out there it's enemy territory a lot of the time. We have threats, we have lawsuits, exactly. So it's so vital to have a space inside your newsroom that is a safe space for people to come to and work from, so that they can do their best work. But yeah, I'm open to any and all ideas on retaining talent.
Well,
Thank you.
The discussion's going to continue after this. I want to say thank you to you guys for your questions. Thank you to the panelists. I'd like to invite Kajal to come and give you your gifts, and I'd like to invite Khao back up to the mic to close things off. But please, to everyone, please fill in our survey, and please linger and chat for a bit, and let's continue the conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, you are so stylish. Thank you, darling.
That was fun. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I think today has been awesome. I think for me it's been awesome listening to women. Whenever we talk about issues of democracy, it always feels like women are never in the conversation. And it was really a good morning for me, and I hope it was for you too. Protocol must be observed. So I would like to thank the panelists for such a thoughtful conversation. I think today's conversation reminded us that women's disengagement from the news reflects a deeper structural realities in the media, from who owns media institution to whose voices are recognized and as authoritative in the public conversation. My sincere thank you to Explain. I think we need to give them a round of applause.
Very nice.
For today's event. I think well done to the team. I also want to thank the team at the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Where's Lee?
Where is Lee? Thank
very
you guys.
closely with the Explain News team. She's our events coordinator, and she does this on her own. I also want to thank the Canadian High Commission for your partnership and for always partnering with us. At the foundation, we are guided by our strategy. We call it Kholi Tlhahla, making good trouble.
Nice. I love that.
And it is inspired by Madiba's birth name, which reminds us that democracy sometimes requires us to grapple with difficult questions and to challenge power. So thank you for being at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and we hope to see you again soon.
Definitely.
I love that.
Everyone. Just take a photo quickly.
Sorry, I forgot to say you can have more food and
Please have more
mingle. It's called networking. Don't just leave. I forgot the important part.